We'll switch tracks a little bit today. So far what we discussed was feedback systems and op-amps, okay, at the macro model level. We really haven't gone into IC design. What we'll start from today is designing amplifiers on ICs. So as an introduction, I'll go through the kind of components that are available on an IC, okay. I mean, they are similar to what you're familiar with in discrete circuits, but there are some issues that we have to consider while designing circuits and ICs. That's what we'll go through, okay. And we'll say this is a CMOS IC, okay. CMOS integrated circuit, meaning the process is optimized to give you good CMOS transistors, that is NMOS and PMOS transistors, okay. Now, IC design process is highly variable. You can get a large number of extra components at the cost of extra masks. It's after all, like bipolar transistors and CMOS transistors are made out of silicon. Once you have a silicon wafer, you can make both if you have the right set of masks and the process. What we'll look at is what components are available in the sort of basic process, okay. You can have extra components, and sometimes there are varieties of MOS transistors. There can be thick oxide transistors, thin oxide transistors, etc., which are designed to give you different functionality. But we'll look at just the most simple process, okay. So, for instance, when we say CMOS process, we do here things like 0.18 micron CMOS process or some length associated with it. What does it mean? What is 0.18 micron here? Minimum feature size. Yeah. So, typically this 0.18 micron is the minimum length of the transistor, but in general it's the minimum feature size. I mean, if you look at the technologies that I have put up on the course website, there is something called IBM 0.13 micron, but the minimum length of the transistor is 0.12. So, sometimes it's the minimum length, sometimes it's the minimum metal pitch, that is the spacing between metals, but it's related to the smallest geometrical size that you can get on a chip. So, it's usually the minimum length of a MOS transistor or minimum metal pitch. But even when the minimum length is different from this, it won't be too much different. It may be instead of 0.18, 0.16 or 0.20 or something, okay. And currently we are, currently ICs are being produced in 65 nanometer, and also people are talking about 45 nanometer. I think Intel, I don't know if it just released or if it's going to release the processor in 45 nanometers. Okay. They are incredibly small sizes. So, how do you make the chip? You start off with a silicon wafer, typically the P-type of silicon wafer, and you can make all kinds of things on it. First of all, to make transistors, you can make transistors directly on the P substrate. Okay. So, by drawing N plus diffusions, which are source and drain, and having a gate between the two areas, you can get a transistor. In fact, the gate defines the source and drain areas. Okay. Or this is how you make it. I mean, this is the basic NMOS transistor. How many of you have taken courses in device fabrication? Everybody. Everyone is familiar with all this? So I'll go through this thing quickly. And to make a PMOS transistor, you make an N-well and put P diffusions in them. And of course the gate between the diffusions. Now typically you start with a P substrate, but it doesn't have to be. You can start with an N substrate. And also there are things known as triple well process where this the NMOS is also in an isolated well. Okay, but we'll consider process of this type, in which case where is the substrate of the NMOS transistor? It is the P substrate itself. So the substrates of all NMOS transistors are connected together. And where do you connect them? What's that? Lowest potential. Why? So you want to avoid the possibility of this diode getting forward biased. So if you connect the anode of the diode to the lowest potential in the circuit, it will not get forward biased. Okay. So similarly, this can be tied to the highest potential, but because it is separated, you look at what potential these source and drain regions are at, and you connect it above the source and drain. Okay. And on top of it, you have a number of metal layers. So this is the poly. So this is a planar process, right? Everything is in planes. So this can be the first metal layer. On top of it, you have the second metal layer separated by an oxide and so on. And to make contacts from one metal to the other, you can think of it as boring holes in it and filling it with metal. Okay. So as a circuit designer, you have no control over this dimension, that is into the depth of the wafer. You only have control over what is happening into the plane of the wafer. That is, you can control the sizes of these things in the plane, but not in the, if I call this the z-axis, not along the z-axis. Okay. So you can change the size of these metal pieces, but not the thickness of the metal pieces. Okay. And similarly, all of these things, these N plus the diffusion thickness and so on, you can't change. What you can change is in the plane, which is into the, in this case, into the board, right, into the screen. So you have a number of metal layers. You can connect them to poly and diffusion as you wish. Okay. And typically a modern process will have maybe 6 metal layers at least, 5 to 6 metal layers. Okay. So that's a basic CMOS process, and you can, although it's a CMOS process, you can realize a number of other components, which is what we are going to look at now. Okay. What are all the components you would need? So let's say NMOS and PMOS are a given in a MOS process, then what else would you need? Resistors. Then what's that? Diodes. Then what else? BJTs. Inductors. So if I give you more time, I think you'll come up with a longer list, so I'll stop here. So NMOS and PMOS, it's clear how you make it. And what you have control is over the width and length of the MOS transistor. Okay. So if you take an NMOS transistor, this is the cross section. This is the length. And if you look at the plan view, the diffusion areas have a certain width. That is the width of the MOS transistor. Okay. So we'll see a little bit later how to lay out these things properly. Okay. And PMOS, it is similar. Let's say you wanted to make W equals 100 micron and L equals 0.18 micron. How would you make it? So you would have this to be 100 micron and this to be 0.18. How would you make something like this? Some transistor which has 100 micron width and 0.2 micron width, 0.2 micron length. So you can, if you connect a number of transistors in parallel, it is like increasing the width, right? So I have one transistor, I have another transistor. If I happen to connect these two in parallel, it's like adding the widths of the two transistors. Okay, so that's what I do when you can't make a sensible layout by having a 100 micron wide device and which is 0.18 micron long. Okay, so to get a wide device, you use what is known as a multi-fingered device. The finger here refers to the gates. Okay. So you have a number of gates which separate diffusion areas. So all of this is N plus for an NMOS transistor. And you lay it out in a line like this, but you have to connect things in parallel. So you connect this to this to this and this to this. Sorry. You connect this to this one to this one. Okay. So this is like connecting the 5 transistors in parallel. So you can use one side as the source, the other side as the drain. So this is what you normally do. Okay, you take some reasonable width, typically a micron or 2, but it can be different from that, and then you connect a number of such devices in parallel to get the desired width. Okay. So this will be more area efficient when you lay it out, as well as we will see later, it will give you lesser parasitic capacitance. Okay, we will look at the model of the MOSFET a little later. How would we make a resistor? MOS in triode region. Okay, what else? What's the problem with the MOS in triode region? Can we use it as a resistor? Non-linearity. Okay. So yeah, we can use it, but it is non-linear. Then what else? Poly. So you can use a piece of polysilicon as a resistor, or you can even use a piece of metal, but the resistivity will be very small. Okay. So we'll look at more linear resistors than MOS transistors. Of course, you can use MOS transistors in the linear region as resistors, but you can even make more conventional resistor by having a, let's say, a bar of poly. Again, you have no control over the thickness. This is the length and this is the width. Now length and width are referred to so that the current flows along the length. Okay. So what is the resistance of this? So it is rho L by W times T. In the cross-sectional area is W times T. So rho is the resistivity of the material. Now because you don't have any control over the thickness, so it doesn't make sense for you to sit and calculate the fixed thickness all the time. So this rho by T is specified as the sheet resistance. Okay. So the resistance is the sheet resistance times L by W. Okay. So again, it is specified as some ratio of quantities over which you have some control. And the units of sheet resistance are resistance itself, but it's typically referred to as having units of ohms per square. Square simply means that if you have 5 squares of metal, 5 squares of material along the length, then you have 5 times the sheet resistance. Okay. So each one of these pieces gives you a resistance of the sheet resistance, and you just count the number of squares to find out the total resistance. Okay. And you can do this with poly, or you can do it with metal. And poly also, there are different types. So when you use a poly for a gate of a MOS transistor, you want its resistivity to be very small. So it is silicided. Whereas when you want it for a resistance, if you want kilo ohms of resistance, and if your sheet resistance is, let's say, 2 ohms per square, if you want 1 kilo ohm, you need 500 squares. Okay. Because so you will end up needing a long piece of poly. So there is also non-silicided poly which gives you a higher resistance in some processes that you can use. So usually there is a variety of resistances available in a process. Okay. And they'll have different values of sheet resistance, and you have to use whatever is suitable for that particular value. I mean, if you want like 200 ohms, you may use a different type of resistance than if you want 200 kilo ohms. So it's specified by sheet resistance, pretty simple definition, should be pretty clear. What else can you use to make a resistance? What other feature do you have in a process that you can use to make a resistance? You can use one of the diffusion layers, basically. So it's also a conducting layer, but not a perfectly conducting layer. So you can use it as a resistance. So again, if you have a P substrate and N well, you draw a long N well, just like you would draw a long bar of poly. Okay, and you make connections on either end, and it will be exactly the same. It will have some sheet resistance, and the total resistance will be sheet resistance times the number of squares along the length of the resistor. What's the problem with this type of resistance? Yeah, it is. I mean, so this is the poly resistance. It is dependent on the doping, right? So it is dependent on doping. Yeah, that's true. But it's assumed that the foundry will give you information on what the resistance, sheet resistance is after it computes the. I mean, after it does the processing. Okay. One of the problems, we have not looked at the model yet, but there will be parasitic capacitance. Essentially, the whole thing will be a reverse bias diode, right? It will be a large reverse bias diode. So the diode capacitance will be will appear in the resistance in some way or the other. And what else? Depends upon bias. Okay. So what will depend upon bias? Resistance. And why? Yeah, that's actually a big problem that if you look at this, if I draw it in maybe a little more detail, maybe let me exaggerate the height of this. Now, first of all, there will be a depletion layer on either side because it's a reverse bias diode. Okay. Now, that gives you some uncertainty in the resistance value because you think that it is some height and then you calculate the resistance. Then at different values of bias, you get different values of resistance. Okay, because the thickness of the material available for conduction is different. Secondly, even bigger problem is typically you have a voltage, DC voltage across this. So that means that if it is like this, the depletion width is going to be greater on one side and less on the other side. So as you change the voltage, the depletion thickness changes. So what happens? You get a nonlinear behavior. Okay. So even though this part that is conducting shows a linear relationship, the thickness of that part changes with the voltage. So you will get a nonlinear behavior. Okay, if you plot I versus V, you will not get a straight line, you will get something else. So that's also a big problem, because you use resistances in many cases where you want a linear V to I behavior, and in this case you don't get it. Okay. So the problems are parasitic capacitance and nonlinearity. But you can use it because annual resistivity tends to be large, and in some cases, in many processes, that's the only kind of resistance that's available. Okay. Now what happens is, like I said, poly you can have it with different doping and so on. To have a polysilicon piece with different doping, you will need different masks. You will need extra masks. To say that, let's say that you had one process where every piece of polysilicon had the same doping. Then there is some particular processing of poly that needs to be done, and that's it. Now let's say like some pieces have to be specified to have a higher doping and some have a lesser doping. Then during one part of the process you have to mask some of the pieces, during the other part of the process you have to mask other pieces. So you will need an extra mask to do that, and that is expensive. Mask making is the most expensive part of fabrication. Okay. In a modern silicon process, the cost of the masks will be in the maybe $10 million or something like that. The number of to get all the masks. Usually a CMOS process will have about 30 or 40 masks, and to get all of that, it's probably in the high tens of millions, or $10 million or even higher than that. Okay. So in many cases, what is done is to keep the cost down, you have a limited number of masks. That means that you don't have all these options of high resistivity poly and so on. But you will always have an N-well simply to make a PMOS transistor. So maybe that's the only type of resistive layer that's available. Okay. How do you make capacitors? Transistor. Which one? Trench? No, okay. Trench. What is a trench? So that is used only in certain processes, like when you make a DRAM or something, to make that capacitor and have a very large density, you will kind of bore a trench into this and make a capacitor. But that's not available in a standard CMOS process. So in a regular CMOS process, how would you go about making a capacitor? What's that? Metal layers. First of all, you put any pieces of metal together, you will get capacitance between them. Okay. So you can take two metal sheets, and there will be some capacitance between the two, depending on the area of the pieces of metal. And in some cases, you will have a special metal layer such that the spacing between two metal layers is small. So that gives you a higher capacitance density. Okay. So again, because this the capacitance between two layers is dependent on the area of the capacitance and the thickness, but you don't have no control over the thickness. So epsilon and T are combined together to give you a specification C area, which basically specifies how many, it's basically the capacitance per unit area. Okay. Oh, this part is not visible. So it's the capacitance per unit area. So again, that you can use to figure out how much area you need for the plates. So the larger area you use, the more costly it is. Okay, that's the game with the IC. So you have to be a bit careful while using very large capacitors. What do you think is the value of capacitor that you can realize on a chip? Picofarads. So actually you can have a little more than that. So if you look at 0.18 micron technology, you will have capacitors of the order of 1 femtofarad per micron square. Okay. So to get 1 picofarad, you will need approximately 30 by 30 micron square, but you can use a lot more than that. So 1 femtofarad, sorry. 1 femtofarad per micron square. Okay. So you need 30 by 30 microns to realize about 1 picofarad. So you can realize a lot more than that. So one is, of course, is obvious parallel plate stuff. What else can you do? MOS capacitance. So you can also use the MOS capacitance. What do you do to the MOS transistor to make it behave like a capacitance? Okay, short the source and drain, and then use it in the. So if you look at the CV curve of a MOSFET, of an N MOSFET, it does something like this. It is in the accumulation region, then it's in the depletion region, and then it goes to the inversion region, right? So you can use it either in the inversion region or in the accumulation region to get a large capacitance. Okay. And what would be the advantage of some capacitance like this? Why would we want to do something like this? Because the gate oxide is very thin compared to the separation between metals. The density of a MOS capacitor is much higher than the density of any other capacitor that you get. In fact, all of this process innovation is to try to get a reliable gate oxide which is very thin. That's how we get a thin gate oxide and also a short length for the MOS transistor. Okay. So the density of a MOS capacitor will be very high, but it will need a bias and it will be non-linear because it's some voltage dependent capacitance. Okay. So you can use the MOS capacitor in accumulation or inversion region if you want a fixed capacitance, and you have to bias it. Okay. So you can't have zero bias across the, you can't necessarily have zero bias across the capacitance. So depending on what bias you have available, you can either use an NMOS transistor or a PMOS transistor as a capacitance. Okay. And also there is one more thing which we won't discuss too much. Because of this voltage dependence, you can also use a MOS capacitor as a voltage variable capacitor. So you do need it in some applications. We won't discuss it probably in this course, but for instance, when you make an LC oscillator, you need a variable capacitor to tune the oscillation frequency. So for that, you can use this part of the curve. So you can use either MOSFETs or bits of metal to make a capacitance. And normally you would think of making capacitance like these parallel sheets. Okay. But that's not the only way to make it. So now this is the cross-sectional view, right? There are two metal sheets, and in the top view, they look like this. So there are two metal sheets, one under the other one. But that's not the only way to make capacitors. You can also have capacitance with a single layer of metal as well. You can cut up the metal like a comb, okay, and another piece of metal like this. So there will be capacitance between these two plates. Now, if you look at it in a modern IC process, so maybe in long ago, if you look at the minimum width of a piece of metal and its height, the metal piece would look like this in cross section. Okay. Now, as we have progressed in technology, the width of the metal has reduced a lot. The thickness also has reduced, but definitely not by the same amount. So in a modern process, the minimum width metal will look like this. That is, it is actually taller than it is wide. Okay. So in fact, by doing something like this, you can get a larger capacitance than by doing something like putting two parallel plates on top of each other. Okay. Now you can do this in one layer, but also you can do it in many layers and stack them all together. So you can get a lot of capacitance like this. Now as you go to finer and finer geometry technologies, this will get better and better. And also there are all kinds of weird combinations of connections that you can use. Right. So for instance, you can have four pieces of metal, that is let's say this is in metal 1, this is in metal 2, and you have two capacitor plates A and B. You can make this A, this one B, and this one A, and this one B. So you have field lines like this, like this. Okay. So you can try to maximize it. It actually turns out that this is not particularly better than doing something like this, but people have tried all kinds of things. Okay. So, I mean, there is some value in trying to get different components from the same limited process that you have. Okay. So people have tried all kinds of things and come up with creative ideas for making capacitors and so on. You can, again, it will be nonlinear. Okay. And the amount of capacitance you get will be probably small. When you want a variable capacitor, that's an option. But as we are going to finer and finer geometry processes, it turns out that even for a variable capacitor, it's better to use a MOS transistor because you get a larger variable range. When you had a large amount of bias, you vary the reverse bias of the diode over a large range and you get a large range of capacitance. But as the voltages have shrunk, it's better, it turns out it's better to use a MOSFET. Okay. And when you want to use it as a capacitor, it is not good enough to be used as a capacitor, meaning it's not dense enough. Okay. And that's usually the problem you see. If you try to use it as a diode, you get too much capacitance. If you try to use it as a capacitor, you don't get enough. So you'll have to, I mean, you basically screwed both ways. How would you make diodes? So it's quite simple. So you take an N well and you put a P plus in it and you get a diode. But also any diode you make, this is the diode you want, okay? Between P plus and the N minus, and you will also end up with the other diode, okay, which is actually a larger diode to the substrate. So you use this diode, but you will also have this diode in the picture. So that's a parasitic element that you cannot avoid. But you rarely use diodes as diodes in IC design. Okay. If you want a diode, what do? You short the base and collector of a bipolar transistor. Why do you do this? Why not use a diode? So even in bipolar transistor process, even when you have bipolar transistors and diodes, you prefer to make diodes using bipolar transistors. Why is that? What's that? No. Okay, I'm telling you that in the same process, both diode and a bipolar transistor is available. I would still prefer to make a diode using a bipolar transistor. That is, basically, I would rather have, let's say I can make both these structures, okay, and equally well. But I would rather use, this P is thin, of course, this is the base. I would rather connect these two and this and use a diode between these two terminals rather than between these two. Why is that? Is it better in some way or am I just perverted? What's that? Will be? Why? No, it depends only on, no, that's not true. Why is the saturation current for a BJT more? First of all, you can increase the saturation current by increasing the area of the device. So that's not necessarily an issue. Have you seen this? In fact, if you take a diode in the lab and measure its IV characteristic, it will not be all that great and exponential. But if you do this, it will be a good exponential. Why is that? Anyway, think about it. There are a couple of issues with it, but if you want a diode with a nice exponential characteristic, you would want to use this, not really this one. Okay. How do you make a bipolar transistor in a CMOS process? Is it possible? How do you make it? So essentially for BJT you need three kinds of dope regions next to each other. So if you make a PMOS transistor, you will have P diffusers in an N well. So you have PNP here. Okay, you also have PNP in the X direction. Okay. So again, I think this plot ended up too small. So you have this is a possible transistor, and also this is a possible transistor. Okay. So which is the emitter and which is the collector? So by the way, you have a similar structure here also. Okay. I mean, whether you want it or not, it is there. No, it's up to you to bias it properly and use it as a bipolar transistor. So which is the emitter and which is the collector here? Huh? Why? So the lower doped region is the collector. Okay. So in this case, clearly this is the emitter. What about the horizontal transistor? Which is the collector and emitter in this case? For this transistor, which is the collector and which is the emitter? Huh? So actually it's up to you, because it's a symmetrical device. It's doped symmetrically on the two sides. So you can make either one the collector and the other one the emitter. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why these bipolar transistors are inferior to a specialized bipolar transistor. When you make a bipolar transistor, you do make the emitter much more heavily doped compared to the collector. But when you use a lateral transistor, you can't do that. Okay. So you can use either the lateral transistor, which is basically the horizontal transistor here, or you can use the vertical transistor. What's the problem with the lateral transistor? Base width can be large, but again, this is related to the length of the transistor, right? So in a modern process, you can make it quite small. Okay. So that is a potential problem. So what happens if the base width is large? Beta is small. Yeah. So what about the vertical transistor? Is it a good transistor? So the collector is connected to the substrate. That's a problem. The collector, you don't have access to the collector terminal. You have access only to the base and emitter. Okay. So the collector is always grounded. Still, we do use this transistor, as we will see. Okay. But the vertical transistor has a collector permanently grounded. So that's a problem. But even with these limitations, we do use these bipolar transistors. Okay. So when you want a bipolar transistor, you can use something like this. Okay. And when you want a diode which is connected to ground, you can use this. Okay. So you have basically you have a vertical bipolar transistor. You connect its base to the collector and use it as a diode. Okay. So we can have bipolar transistors with some limitations. We have a symmetrical bipolar transistor to which we have access to all three terminals. or we have a vertical bipolar transistor in which we don't have access to the collector. Okay, so we can use either of them. So clearly these are not very good for amplifying. We use it for other purposes. I mean, it is used sometimes in amplifiers, but not very often. How do you make inductors? The inductor is the easiest. Whenever you have a wire, you can make an inductor by just coiling it up like this. Okay. So this is on a layer of metal, you make a coil, and it has to be a planar coil because we have a planar process. So you make as many turns as you want, and then you can get a certain inductance. Okay. So again, at low frequencies, we don't use inductors because even with a large number of turns, the amount of inductance you can get with a reasonable area is probably 10 or 20 nanohenries. Okay. So it's only at very high frequencies that these inductors are useful. So that's about the components that are available in the process. And again, as I said, you can have more or fewer components depending on the extra process options that you have. But we'll look at these components. That's good enough for our purpose. So what we'll do next, that was just to introduce you to what kind of components are available and a rough, very, very rough picture of what their cross section looks like. Okay. What we'll do next is to model them in some more detail. Okay. So if we have nonlinear components, we'll have large signal and small signal models. If we have linear components, we'll have basically the same model for large and small signals. Okay. So that's what we need to look at, and then the model will contain other extra elements like parasitic elements. That is, you want to make a resistor, but you also get a capacitor with it, etc. Right? And finally, probably one aspect that you are not yet familiar with, that is mismatch. So one aspect of IC design is that if you make two resistors with identical width and length, they are supposed to have identical values. So in fact, you exploit this heavily in IC design, and that is matching of like components. But there will be some mismatch, that is some difference between the values. We will see how that is modeled and how it changes with the value of the resistor itself. Okay. So first let's take a resistor model. So a model simply means that you come up with some equivalent circuit which mimics the electrical behavior of the component in question. Okay. So either it's an equivalent circuit or a set of equations which models the resistor. Okay. So let's say we have a resistor of, again we are not worried about the thickness, we look at the length and the width. So what are all the things you need to model here? Firstly, the resistance value itself, and that, as we saw earlier, is given by sheet resistance times L by W. Okay. What else? What parasitic elements would you see? Parasitic capacitance. Okay. What is that dependent on? So let's say I have a substrate and I have a piece of poly. Okay. So how much is the parasitic capacitance? So first of all, you have essentially this is a parallel plate capacitor also, right? You have a plate of poly above the substrate. So you have essentially a parallel plate capacitor. So there is some capacitor which is known as, let me call it C area, which is related to this distance, okay, and the area of the plate, okay, and this epsilon is the epsilon of silicon dioxide, which is the common insulating material. Okay. What else? Is this all there is to the parasitic capacitance? Or is there something more? Fringing capacitance from the edges, yeah. So if you look at the field lines, now I'll draw the view looking in from here. You have a piece of poly and if all of the field lines are vertical like this, you will have this to be the capacitance. But that's not the only thing, and as I said, this height is not negligible. In fact, you will have capacitance from the sides to the substrate. Okay. In fact, let me not call this C area, I will call it something else, maybe C1. And what is C2 dependent on? It depends on W and T. Yeah, it depends on T for sure, but W and L are under your control. So does it depend on the area W times L? It depends on the perimeter, okay? Because you have this fringing field, it's at a fixed distance from the substrate. So basically how long you go along this edge is what determines the capacitance. So C2 is related to the perimeter of the resistor, okay? So the total capacitance is given by some capacitance per unit area times the area of the resistor plus some capacitance times unit length, okay. I will call it C length here, times the perimeter of the resistor, okay. So if you have a long and skinny resistor, the fringing capacitance can be significant, okay. So in general, for very thin wires, the fringing capacitance is a significant part of the parasitic capacitance. So fine, we have now associated the capacitance with the resistor. How do we model it? What is the equivalent circuit? Because originally I thought that a resistance can be modeled by this, okay, and this value I could calculate as sheet resistance times L by W. Now I also have a capacitance associated with this, okay. Where is the capacitance in the circuit? What do I model? So it is a distributed capacitance. That means that it is really distributed along the length of the resistor. So what do I do? So one thing is, you can try and calculate the equations for the distributed circuit, but it will become too complicated. So for circuit design purposes, what you can do is, you can firstly cut the capacitance into two pieces and put it on either side, okay. Or if you want a little more sophisticated modeling, you can cut up the resistance also and have more sections. Basically, the more sections you take, more it approaches the distributed model, okay. So you can take C by 4, C by 2, C by 4 and this. So you can play around with these values and see what the difference in response is. For instance, you can measure the impedance of this element, okay, with different models, and they will be different. So, and the difference will be at different frequencies. So depending on which frequency is of interest to you, the models will make some difference. But typically for circuit design, it's enough if you use something like this, or maybe with a couple of more sections, okay. So similarly, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. Similarly, a capacitance will have, when you make a capacitance, so I said you will make two parallel plates, right? So this is the top view, and the cross section will look something like this. Now the capacitance is supposed to be the density times width times length, okay, where this is perhaps W and this is length. But you also have additional fringing capacitance between the edges of the plates, and also there is a top plate and a bottom plate. So there is some capacitance between the bottom plate and the substrate, okay. So you will have to model all of this. So your capacitance is, let's say these are the two terminals of interest, you will get a capacitance between the two, and also you will have a capacitance to the substrate. So you will have to model all of these things in order to get a complete model of the capacitance. And also you have to keep in mind that this value is not dependent only on the area, it also depends on the perimeter. It has some component because of the area plus some component because of the perimeter. Okay. All this will come into picture when you are concerned about matching. So, for instance, you have two capacitors, one of which has W and L, other one has 2W and L. Okay. The area component of the capacitance of this is twice as this. Okay. But the total capacitance will not be, because the perimeter is not twice. Okay. Any questions on any of this? We'll deal with this in more detail in the following classes. Like how to, basically what we are interested in is how to get what the model is. That's very simple. In most cases, we can get the model quite easily, and also you are quite familiar with the MOSFET models, so we won't dwell too much on it. And except for the parasitic part of it. Now, the second part is, like, one of the things of great interest in IC design is to get two components which have identical values or some fixed ratios. Maybe I want this resistance to be exactly 2 times that one, and so on. So you are familiar with circuits like DACs and D2A converters and so on, where you use like R2, R4, R, etc., etc. So how to get those ratios accurately? That's of some interest. And also to compute what the error is in the ratio. Okay. So when you make when you make two identical components, they will not be exactly the same. Okay. So what that random error is, we'll look at all of those things. Okay.